be more than human.
And welcome back to the channel. My name is Joseph Carroll. I write under the pen name J.R. Carroll. And today I'm going to bring you my top 10 books of all time. Now, I just passed my year here on BookTube, so I felt, it was a good time to, put out a list as I read a whole, I think I've read almost 70 books last year, or 70 books since I've started BookTube here. And so I figured let's kind of switch up. I think last year I did a top 5 list. So we'll get to see if any of these have been, bounced out of the list, and then what makes up my list here. And I did have a kind of a rule that I'm putting in, at least for this year, and we'll see maybe if it changes next year. But only one book per series will make this list. And then I'm going to put up 2 honorable mentions. So, first honorable mention is going to be Skin Game. And the reason, from the Dresden Files, that is, and the reason it's an honorable mention is because I'm only doing one book per series. So, if I wasn't, this book would probably be on the list because it has a whole bunch of the things that I really like. It's one of the later Dresden books, so it's amazing. Of course, you have all this development, and then I love a heist. And that's what Skin Game is. At the core, it's a heist book, and I love a good heist story. So, and another thing with these is, some of these aren't, first book in series or standalone. Some of them are further in. So I'll try not to, I'm not trying to do any spoilers. If it's a book like that, then I'll just kind of give you a general reason why I love it. And then the second honorable mention is Carmilla. And this would be by far the oldest book in the list, seeing as how it's from like 1875. But it's a novella. And so I wasn't sure, should I put it on the list or not? So I was like, all right, to be safe, we'll put it on our honorable mentions. And this is an book that I think I've went through once. Like it's a once a year book that I go through, and it's like kind of the quintessential original vampire story, and it's what Bram Stoker was influenced by. And just a great story, and you can kind of feel those original vampire tropes, and it's very thriller like. Everything's in the darkness. Is it real? Is it not? What is she feeding off blood? Is she feeding off energy? So it's just a great book. It's super short, and I think everybody should read it. All right, so we're going to start the list off with
Number 10.
Eaters of the Dead. This was, I think, number 5 on my list last year, if I remember correctly. So it has fallen down the list, but still a top 10 book. It's by Michael Crichton, and it is kind of a mixture of the first, like, I want to say this, maybe the first 2 chapters are almost like not word for word, but pretty close to Ivan von Lund's journal that he kind of did. And then, this Middle Eastern guy is traveling up towards Russia, and then he ends up hooking up with a group of Vikings, and they take him back to their, their home, and it basically evolves into Beowulf. Pretty much. I love it. Some people think the book is too like the action's a lot different in it. It's some people would call it textbook like, but I love it. Maybe it's because I love history and I don't mind it. I've never been one of those people that minded sitting and listening to a lecture. Um, but this gives you a lot of like side notes and stuff like that inside the book. A lot of like you know customary details, and I just love the whole thing. I first time I read it, maybe 20 years ago, back in high school. So it was great then. I just recently read it again. It's great now, and you should all check it out. And then the next book is
Number 9.
Mistborn, and it is actually the newest read. And I read it because of all the things that people were talking about. Brandon Sanderson and certain people were saying, "Oh, he's not really a great writer." And then I was like, "Well, I can't just defend the guy and never have read a book." So I was like, "Well, we'll start off with Mistborn." And I loved it, man. I just thought it was so, the magic system was so different. And at first, I thought it was going to be hard to kind of get the grips of the magic system. But after a few chapters, it just you just know it. I mean, he describes everything so easily for you, and everything is very unique. Very unique, very and the world is very like late 1700s, early 1800s, which isn't a lot of books aren't set in those time frames. So yeah, Sanderson is definitely the thumbs up to him, and I will continue the Mistborn trilogy at least through the first one. And then for our next one,
Number 8.
Mr. Be Gone. And this one is by Clive Barker. And so I have read, I think it's 2 or 3 by Clive Barker. And to me, he may be the most underrated author like out there. Hellraiser is based off the Hellbound Heart, and he's had a bunch of movies. And I just recently watched the Books of Blood on Hulu, which was it's kind of like a movie anthology thing that's based off of his writings, and he's got video games adaptations, and for a guy who has so much success in the book community, I just don't think he gets the love he deserves. Mr. Be Gone it has very meta. One thing, if anyone's ever said anything about this book, you'll probably hear where the person within the book itself says, "Burn this book. Stop reading now. Burn the book." So you'll hear that very much throughout the book, and it's about a demon who escapes hell, but in a very weird way. There's a lot of super dark humor, but a lot of crazy things happen, and you're like, how is this funny? But somehow Clive Barker gets you to chuckle at things that you probably shouldn't chuckle at. Great horror book, great author. We'll definitely be reading more by Clive Barker this year. So let's head on to the next one, which is
Number 7.
Reaper, by Will Wight, and this is from the Cradle series. And I really struggled to determine which one I wanted to put in here from Cradle. And I can't tell you a whole lot about the book Reaper because it's so far in. It's like it's gonna be like the third to last book. But the reason it makes it to number 7 on the list is because if you know me and you know my taste in books and you know my taste in movies, I'm a moment person. You can just have a movie that's just good, just a good solid movie all the way through. But if you have one or two moments in that movie or moments in that book that can just elevate the story to the next level, and that is what Reaper does. If you have read all of Cradle or you've read Reaper, you know what I'm talking about. There's a moment in here where you're just lose your mind and you can't believe what just happened, and that's how Cradle does it just ups the ante every book until Waybound is coming out here in another month or so, and I just can't wait to see where Will Wight takes us. All right, so let's roll right into the next one, which is
Number 6.
City of the Dead by Brian Keene. And this is the second book in the Red Rising series. And it's a post apocalyptic zombie sci fi dystopian portal fantasy. Yeah, at Doomsday, the whole the whole gamut. Um, and to me, City of the Dead is um, probably his best work. I've read other, I've also read, oh, well, its original title was Writing Season, but then they changed it to Dark Hollow. But City of the Dead is really the culmination of a father in this world that I just described is trying to get to his son, which is like kind of, I think he was from like West Virginia, trying to get up to Connecticut or somewhere in that neighborhood. So he's got to go hundreds and hundreds of miles through just zombie infested. And these zombies don't just infest people, they infest animals. So it is one of the craziest book series. And really, you just need to read the two, The Rising and then City of the Dead. Quintessential horror books. If you haven't read them, you have to, and it will pull at your heartstrings, and you will realize that in some instances, like, is there any hope at all? It's one of those books. So we are closing in to the top 5, and the next one is
Number 5.
Morningstar. And that is book 3 in the Red Rising series. This is also a more recent read for me. This I just been running through this series since it was, people kept telling me to check it out, check it out, check it out. So um, I know some people actually think Golden Sun book 2 is the best, but I just felt Morningstar really hit the mark here, and I can't. Again, it's book 3, so I can't divulge too much of what happens. But you know, this is the last book where you only have Darrow's POV. In the later books, multiple POVs come into thoughts, but man, Pierce Brown knows how to make you hate people, and gosh, and Darrow takes so much punishment, but he never gives up. Has that enduring spirit. It is very much like the hero's journey, and there's no better storytelling like platform than the hero's journey, in my opinion. And this is probably maybe my favorite sci-fi book, single book. Yeah. So if you haven't checked out Red Rising yet, yeah, jump on Red Rising. The last book in the Red Rising series is coming out in July. Lightbringer's coming soon. So, all right, and let's get on to the next one, which is
Number 4.
The Grand Dark This was my 2022 book of the year, and so it lands at number 4. And this book is it's written by Richard Kadrey, and he's known for Sandman Slim. That's his big series, New York Times best-selling and everything. But I decided before I interviewed him, I was like, well, I want to read this other book. The synopsis looked interesting, the cover was interesting, and when I read this book, it's kind of a post war. It's like set in its own world. It's like a post war world, but kind of dystopian in nature. There's still civilization and everything, but like this giant city, there's always like dirt and ash are falling. It's very industrious, a military complex. Very much the haves and the have-nots. But the crazy thing about this book is, even books that I love, when you start getting close to the end, you're like, okay, I'm almost at the end, and you're like, oh, this is, even if you love it, you're like, okay, all right, I'm ready. We're ready for it to be over and to see the conclusion and everything. And to me, The Grand Arc is one of those few books where I wasn't ready for it to end. I was just like, let's keep, and it's not because it ended abruptly. It's just I wanted to know more about the world. Like, I wanted to know what was going on out there. Open it up even more. And when I interviewed Richard Kadrey, he told me he had planned on making more, but it just wasn't in the cards from the publisher. But maybe we might see something down the road. Hopefully we do, because it was such a great book. And it can be its own standalone, so don't be afraid to pick the Grand Arc up and read it, because you'll be like, oh, there should have been more to it. It can stand on its own. So go out, read it. I will never stop telling people to read the Grand Arc. Great book. All right, so let's roll into the next one, which is
Number 3.
The Gunslinger. And this is book 1 of The Dark Tower. Now, a lot of people will call me crazy for liking The Gunslinger as much as I do. Most people, like a lot of people love The Dark Tower, but they'll say Wizarding Glass, or maybe, there's a lot of people. You got your Wizard and Glass people, you have your Wasteland people, and then you have your Drawing of the Three. The Drawing of the Three people, I think people who really like the Drawing of the Three tend to be those people who like more like thinking about the story. There's more like, character deep diving, sociology, and then your Wizard and Glass people are probably the people who like a bigger, grander story, and then your Wasteland people are people who really like dystopian stuff. They're all great, honestly, but I just like the Gunslinger because it's the most different, and and it's raw. It's more raw than the rest of the books, because it was one of the first books he actually ever wrote. I think he started writing it back in like the early 70s, 72, something like that, and he put it in a drawer and decided not to pick it up for a long time, and then just decided, well, I'm gonna go ahead and finish this. And so it came out later than some of the other books, but it was one of the first books he actually ever wrote. And it's got your fantasy western, which I wrote one of those myself. But yeah, it's got the best action, I think, of all of the Dark Tower. They could have used some more of the action from it in the later books. And Roland is one of the best characters. And in this one, we got all rolling all the time. And I'm a fan of sticking with one POV, so you get to feel that character more instead of bouncing all around. And it's a better. The Gunslinger is better even when you go through the Dark Tower and then you come back to it. Then you're like, a lot of stuff makes sense. Stephen King is an amazing writer, and at some point, maybe this year, I'll restart the Dark Tower series and actually put it out because I read it before BookTube twice. So I don't have any reviews of those, but maybe we'll do it this year. And then our next one is
Number 2.
The Last Wish. Now I go back and forth. It was almost like a coin toss. Do I want The Last Wish or Lady of the Lake? The first book or the last book? And I actually think my top 5, I had The Lady of the Lake in here instead of The Last Wish. But like I said, it's a coin flip. And I just went with The Last Wish because it's the introduction to The Witcher, which is my second favorite series of all time. And I just, Geralt and Dandelion, so many great characters. And I just, hits the nostalgia because I read all the books before I played the games, which I feel like is a lot of opposite for people. A lot of people played the games and then decided to read the books. But I read the books and then played the games. And I feel like The Witcher is that transition because it was written in the late 80s and early 90s. I feel like it's that transition from, old fantasy into modern fantasy. I feel like you get the mixture of it here. And that's another one I've read through the whole series twice, but I haven't done any reviews on that. So eventually we'll get to The Witcher, maybe we'll do discussions like Dresden because I love The Witcher. And now we come to the final one.
Number 1.
Which is Changes, of the Dresden Files. And this book it's the book that everybody tells you, oh, just wait till you get to Changes, just wait till you get to Changes. And I've watched so many people's journey from Mike's book reviews to probably my favorite watching, Sarah from Sarah Reads, go through the Dresden Files, and they're all like, oh my gosh, everyone tells you wait till you get to Changes. And then when you get to Changes, you realize that they were right. They were right all along. And it is one of the culminations, and it has everything. It has, like I said earlier, moments. There are moments and Changes that you will never forget for the rest of your life. If you are a big reader, it's just, you will never forget these moments. You'll never forget what happened. But also the journey is, we're going from urban fantasy to epic fantasy here. And Jim Butcher as a writer is just superb, and he's at the top of his game. And a lot of people, especially when they first start reading Dresden, they probably don't think about Jim Butcher as an amazing writer. They're like, oh well, he's good. The books are good. But going through the Dresden Files, and especially going through Changes, and then reading some of these other books, these other amazing authors, Jim Butcher is at the top. When he is on his A game, there is nobody better. There may be people who are as good, but nobody's better than him when he reaches his apex like he did in Changes. And I'll just be one of those people, if you haven't read the Dresden Files, you have to read it to get to Changes. So If you liked this and if you like lists and all this kind of stuff, make sure you're subscribed. Leave a comment. What are some of your favorites of all time? Give me a little list. If you want to give me a 10 list, that would be awesome too. And I'll let you know if I've read any of those, or tell me ones I should read. If you're comparing them to my list and you think there's some that would pair up really well, let me know. And remember, be more than human.